Meet me in Isaiah chapter 53, because I want to go show you a prophecy, because in reality, whatever you're looking at in the New Testament will have its precedent laid out for you in Old Testament prophecy, and those prophecies are then fulfilled as you look at the characters of the New Testament. So look at Isaiah chapter 53 and verse 4. Surely He has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. Yet we esteemed Him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. I want to pause for a moment on one of the most famous verses in Christianity's prophetic history. Surely we call this Jesus. How many of you can admit that Jesus' name does not appear in Isaiah 53? Now, why does Jesus' name not appear? Because Jesus hasn't been born yet as Jesus. They don't know of Yeshua of Nazareth by the time Isaiah 53 is written. But they do know the servant that God is going to send from the rod and the stem of Jesse, from the root of Jesse, that's going to belong in the kingly line of Israel. And the conclusion that Isaiah gives is, surely He bears our griefs and carries our sorrows. Those are Hebrew words for He has borne our sicknesses and He has carried our pains, and yet we did esteem Him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. And our first blush when we see this man dying is that God must be killing him. That's our first thought. God's killing him. And that was the first thought on the ground the day Jesus died, because the message sent to them from the religious leaders was, cursed is every man that hangs on a tree. This man blasphemed God. He deserves to die. And so the initial return was, God must be killing Jesus. I said the initial return. It's not the final return. The initial return, God must be killing Jesus. But look at the first word of the fifth verse. But. And when you see but, that's a rebuttal, right? So whatever you saw in the previous verse, we might have some new information for you. Verse 5, but He was actually wounded for our transgressions, bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of our peace was upon Him. By His stripes we are healed. So God isn't killing him because He didn't have anything to kill him for. There's no guilt. Jesus brings none of His own guilt. He's actually being wounded for get rid of our for the time being. Just put yourself in there, all right? He's been wounded for my transgressions. He's been bruised for my iniquities. I carried my own junk to the waters of death, and Jesus grabbed hold of my stuff and put it in Him and stepped into death so that I could step into death with Him. 6, all we like sheep gone astray, we turned our own way, everyone to his own way, and the Lord laid on Him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed. He was afflicted. He didn't open His mouth. He was led as a lamb to the slaughter, as a sheep before its shearers is silent. So He opened not His mouth. Go to verse 10. Yet it pleased the Lord to bruise Him. He has put Him to grief. When you make His soul an offering for sin, He shall see His seed prolong His days, and the pleasure of the Lord shall prosper in His hand. This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Where does that get its prophetic voice? Isaiah 53:10. It pleased the Lord to bruise Christ, into the verse, and the pleasure of the Lord will prosper in His hand. God's pleasure will prosper in the bruising of Jesus. So as Jesus takes the brunt into Himself, for who I am and for who you are, for the sin and the evil of this world, as He places Himself there on the sacrifice of baptism. We're talking about the cross. The waters of baptism prelude what happens at Calvary. Jesus goes down into the water to say to us, if you'll enter into this, you can receive how much righteousness? All righteousness. Now, where in the world do we get off thinking that when we come into Christ, we grow in our right standing? That we're kind of saved, but then we're more saved the longer we've been saved. Now we go, oh, we don't really believe that. Yes, we do. Sure we do. That's how we preach. That's how we teach. It's how we sing. It's how we live. That guy's just barely saved. I'm not even sure he's still saved. That guy's only kind of saved. Those people down there just think they're saved. I know what it means to be truly saved. I used to think I was saved. Now I know I'm saved. We talk like that all the time. Yeah. You know what he's doing? He's out there now. He's living like he's really saved. We do it naturally because we honestly don't see all righteousness when we get baptized into Christ. And the reason we don't see it is because we think righteous is acting righteous. We think that what makes people righteous is when they do right. They do right, they must be righteous. Okay, well what if they just did right and didn't know Jesus? Would they be declared righteous by doing right? Oh, we wouldn't buy that. Well, they got to at least start with Jesus and then get to work in order to go do right. It's either Jesus or it's not Jesus. All means all. So when Jesus goes in to fulfill all righteousness, what's he take from you? What's your end of the deal? You walk up and confess who you are. This is why I like to tell people, just stop lying about yourself. Just bring the real you to Jesus. The real you to Jesus is what Jesus died for, not the fake you. The you don't even know. The you project. Bring the real you to Christ and lay it at Christ's feet and let Christ take into you who you really are. And as you let him take into you who you really are, you might start to have a revelation of who he really is in you, because he's here to fulfill all righteousness. So this is my beloved Son in whom I am well pleased. How is God well pleased? Jesus hadn't healed anybody. Jesus hadn't raised anybody from the dead. Jesus hadn't fed anybody. Jesus hadn't done anything. He's done one thing. He went into the waters of baptism and God goes, I am well pleased. And to the prophetic voice of a man like John the Baptist, who's been preaching Isaiah his whole ministry, there's one coming. I'm just making his path straight. What he hears is, it pleases the Lord to bruise him, and God's pleasure is in the hand of this one. And when he hears God say, this is the one in whom I am well pleased, he knows that the only pleasure that's prophesied in the Old Testament is whenever the suffering servant takes the bruising on behalf of surely he was wounded for our transgressions and bruised for our iniquities, and the chastisement of our peace was upon him. In that moment, the Father looks down and says, I'm pleased. He has taken the sins of my people.